Understanding the real estate agency disclosure and election READE form, customer or client? One simple question changes everything. Imagine you've just finished your first meeting with a prospective buyer. The conversation went well. You've answered questions about financing, neighborhoods, market conditions, and the buying process. The buyer smiles and says, "Great, you're my agent now." It sounds simple enough, but are you? That one statement has created one of the most misunderstood issues in real estate. Many consumers believe that the moment they begin talking with a real estate professional, they automatically have an agent representing them. In reality, agency is a legal relationship, not simply a friendly conversation. One of the industry's greatest challenges has always been making sure consumers clearly understand who represents whom before negotiations begin. That is exactly why Arizona adopted the Real Estate Agency Disclosure and Election. Why the READE form was created. As you learned in the previous section, the real estate industry spent decades transitioning away from the old sub-agency system. Buyers often believed an agent represented them, when legally, that wasn't the case. As agency relationships became more sophisticated, Arizona recognized that consumers deserved a clear explanation of their options before discussing confidential information or negotiating a transaction. The READE form was developed by the Arizona Association of Realtors to provide that explanation in a simple, standardized format. Rather than creating agency, the form serves as a disclosure and election document that helps buyers and sellers understand the available agency relationships before deciding how they wish to proceed. Simply put, the READE form answers one very important question. Who does this real estate professional represent? The READE form is not an employment agreement. One of the biggest misconceptions among new licensees is believing the READE form hires the agent. It does not. The READE form is not an employment agreement. Instead, it explains the possible agency relationships available and allows the consumer to acknowledge how they wish to be represented. Compensation, duties, and contractual obligations are established separately through listing agreements, buyer representation agreements, or other written contracts. Think of the READE as the introduction to the relationship, not the relationship itself. The three agency choices. The READE form explains three primary agency relationships available in Arizona. The first is buyer representation, where the broker represents only the buyer and owes fiduciary duties exclusively to that buyer. The second is seller representation, where the broker represents only the seller under a listing agreement and owes fiduciary duties exclusively to the seller. The third is limited representation, sometimes referred to as dual agency, where the same brokerage represents both parties after obtaining informed written consent. In this situation, the broker must remain neutral and cannot disclose confidential negotiating information without written authorization from the client. Understanding these distinctions allows consumers to make informed decisions before confidential information is ever shared. A real-life Arizona example. Suppose Jennifer walks into your brokerage looking for her first home. You spend an hour discussing neighborhoods, loan programs, school districts, and current market conditions. Before Jennifer begins telling you her maximum budget or negotiating strategy, you explain the different agency relationships available and review the READE form together. Jennifer elects to have your brokerage represent her as a buyer. Now, both of you understand exactly what duties you owe and what she can reasonably expect from your representation. No confusion, no assumptions, no surprises later in the transaction. That's exactly what the READE form is designed to accomplish. The consumer still has responsibilities. One statement printed on the READE form is worth emphasizing because it is often overlooked. Even though a broker owes duties to the parties involved, buyers and sellers are still responsible for protecting their own interests. Consumers should carefully read every agreement before signing to ensure the documents accurately reflect their understanding of the transaction. A skilled real estate professional educates clients, answers questions, and encourages them to understand every document they sign, rather than simply pointing to signature lines. Agency and compensation are separate conversations. Another important concept for today's real estate professional is understanding that representation and compensation are two separate issues. The READE form does not determine how a broker will be compensated. Following the recent changes in Arizona real estate practice, broker compensation is negotiated independently through written agreements. If a seller chooses to compensate the buyer's broker, that agreement is now commonly documented using the Arizona Realtor Seller Compensation Addendum or another appropriate written agreement. Compensation is always negotiable and should never be assumed. This distinction has become especially important as buyers and sellers have more flexibility in negotiating brokerage compensation than ever before. Why this matters. The READE form may seem like just another piece of paperwork. In reality, it is one of the most important consumer protection documents used in Arizona real estate. It reduces misunderstandings. It protects consumers. And it protects licensees by ensuring everyone begins the transaction with a clear understanding of the relationship. When buyers and sellers know exactly who represents them, trust grows stronger, communication improves, and transactions are far less likely to end in disputes. As you'll discover throughout this course, successful real estate professionals don't simply complete forms. They use those forms to educate consumers and build confidence from the very first meeting. Broker tip: never treat the READE form as a document to get signed. Instead, use it as a teaching opportunity. Spending just a few extra minutes explaining agency relationships at the beginning of a transaction can prevent misunderstandings, complaints, and legal disputes later. Online discussion question: why is it important to discuss agency before a buyer or seller shares confidential information? Agency determines who the broker represents and what fiduciary duties are owed. Discussing agency first helps consumers understand the relationship before sharing information that could affect negotiations. Question: why doesn't the READE form establish an agency relationship by itself? Answer: the READE form is a disclosure and election document. Employment agreements and representation contracts establish the legal relationship and compensation between the parties. Question: how does the READE form protect both consumers and real estate professionals? Answer: it promotes transparency by clearly identifying who represents whom, reducing misunderstandings, and helping ensure everyone understands the broker's role before negotiations begin.